Good afternoon, church. There's a story they tell down in Texas about a time before Europeans came to that part of the world. It's a story of the Comanche people. And it occurs during a time of great famine that is brought on by a horrific drought. The rains had not come for months upon months, and the people were suffering. And eventually, many died, including a young mother and young father who had a little daughter that they sacrificed their lives for. And this little girl became an orphan in the village in which she lived. And the people looked upon her with great pity, and they gave her the name, She Who Sits Alone. And all she had left to remember her parents by was this little doll that her father had made for her. And it had some simple clothing that her mother had stitched together for her. And it had this beautiful little blue bonnet around its head. And the people suffered greatly from the drought and the famine as it continued, until finally they went to the shaman of their village, and they asked the shaman to go and to pray to the Great Spirit and to find out what they must do in order for the rains to come again. And the shaman went into his dwelling place, and there he prayed for 3 days and 3 nights, and then finally came out and spoke to the people. And he told them that the Great Spirit was angry with them because they had become such a selfish people, and that the only way to regain the trust and the love of the Great Spirit was to become a people who would sacrifice the thing that is most precious to them. And when the people did that, the rains would come again. And so the shaman told them each to go to their own dwelling and to think about what the greatest thing they had that they could sacrifice. And a warrior went to his home, and he looked as soon as he went inside, and there he saw this mighty bow of his that had been so useful in catching so much game, and he thought to himself, well, certainly this is my most prized possession, but the Great Spirit could not want me to give up such a beautiful bow. It must be something else. And another member of the tribe went to her home, and there she saw a cooking pot that she had made with her own hands, and it was just the right weight and just the right thickness, and she made delicious meals with it, and she loved that pot more than anything else, and she thought to herself, certainly the Great Spirit could not want this. It must be something else. And so it went from each of the dwelling places and each home in the village. People would identify the thing they loved the best, but they always found a rationale for not giving it to the Great Spirit. But out by the great campfire sat she who sits alone, clinging to that small doll that her mother and father gave her, crying, because she knew the greatest thing she had was this last piece of memory of her family. And she knew that her most prized possession belonged not to her, but to the Great Spirit. And finally, with a deep sigh and tears beyond counting, she took the doll and thrust it into the fire, and immediately began to crackle and to burn. And as soon as the doll began to burn, suddenly there was a roaring, thunderous peal coming from the clouds. And the people ran outside of their homes, and they could see the darkness gathering in the distance of a storm. And first they began to cheer, and then they noticed she who sits alone by the campfire, and they saw the remnants of the doll burning there, and they knew the tremendous gift that she had given. And the people felt great shame. But the spirit had been placated. And the thunder grew louder, and before too long, they saw lightning flashing in the sky. And then finally, the rains came, and the people rejoiced. And as the rain came, eventually the crops were able to grow again. And eventually the animals were able to come back, and the people were fed again. But the great miracle of the rain happened the first morning after she who sits alone had made her sacrifice. After a long evening of rain, the people came out of their homes, and they saw the fields all around covered with a beautiful blue flower shaped like a bonnet. And that's the legend of the Texas bluebonnet. You know, legends and teachings and stories like that are told in 100 different cultures. But the way maybe you and I know it best is from a teaching from a man named Jesus. He's asked, "What is the greatest commandment of God?" "You shall love God with all your heart and mind and soul and strength," he replied. "And you shall love your neighbor as yourself." May it be ever so. Amen.